There's something oddly unsettling about receiving a letter from the state that reminds you time is moving faster than you thought. Not a threatening letter, not even an especially dramatic one, just a routine envelope from the DVLA arriving on a quiet morning, sitting among supermarket flyers and electricity bills, calmly informing thousands of drivers over 60 that certain checks, renewals, and reporting responsibilities are changing once again. And I think what's interesting is how emotional these conversations become almost immediately, because on the surface this is administrative, it's paperwork, a reminder, a policy adjustment, but beneath it there's another conversation entirely, one about independence, about aging, about usefulness, about whether society still sees older people as individuals with agency or as problems waiting to happen. You can almost feel the tension in the public response already. Some people look at these letters and see common sense. Roads are busier now, cars are faster, traffic systems are more complicated, medical conditions become more common with age, and there's an understandable argument that regular assessments simply protect everyone involved. It feels rational, sensible even. But then you hear from drivers themselves, men and women who have spent 40 years driving without incident, people who raised children through school runs, commuted through snowstorms, drove aging parents to hospital appointments, built entire lives around the simple reliability of getting into a car and going where they needed to go, and suddenly the conversation becomes much more personal. Because losing confidence behind the wheel is not just about transport, it's about identity. There's this growing feeling that many older people are quietly being pushed toward the edges of public life while everyone pretends it's merely procedural. The language is always careful, safety, efficiency, risk management, but emotionally what some people hear is something else entirely. They hear, perhaps your time is ending. Perhaps your freedom now requires supervision. And honestly, I keep coming back to the timing of all this. Britain is aging rapidly, communities are becoming older, healthcare systems are stretched, public transport outside major cities is increasingly unreliable. In many towns, especially rural ones, driving isn't a luxury, it's survival. If you remove someone's ability to drive, you may also remove their access to friendships, routine, employment, even dignity. The thing people are starting to notice is that modern society often celebrates longevity in theory but struggles with it in practice. We talk constantly about living longer, healthier lives. We praise active retirement. We encourage people to remain engaged and independent for as long as possible, yet simultaneously institutions seem increasingly nervous about what aging actually looks like in reality. And maybe that's the point. Because these letters arrive during a broader cultural moment where age itself feels politically complicated, older generations are often blamed for economic problems, housing shortages, political conservatism, Brexit, environmental decline. At the same time, they are also expected to quietly absorb rising living costs, collapsing local services, and growing isolation without complaint. So when another official reminder arrives questioning fitness to drive, some people experience it as part of a larger message, a suggestion that they are becoming liabilities rather than participants. Of course, there is another side to this discussion, and it matters. There are families who have had deeply frightening experiences with elderly relatives continuing to drive when they clearly should not. There are heartbreaking stories involving declining eyesight, slower reactions, confusion, or medical episodes behind the wheel, and nobody wants difficult truths ignored simply to avoid uncomfortable conversations. That's what makes this issue emotionally difficult. Both sides believe they are protecting something valuable. For some, stricter oversight protects public safety. For others, it protects human independence, and modern politics increasingly struggles to hold those two truths together without turning them into opposing tribes. It's strange, because driving has always represented something unusually emotional in Britain. More than transport, more than machinery. Cars became symbols of adulthood, reliability, competence, even self-respect. Entire generations measured stability through mobility. You passed your test, bought a car, built a life. That sequence mattered psychologically. So when the state begins asking older people to repeatedly prove their competence, there's an unavoidable emotional undertone. Even if the policy itself is reasonable, the experience can still feel humiliating, especially for people already navigating retirement, bereavement, physical decline, or loneliness. And maybe younger generations sometimes underestimate that emotional weight because modern life looks different for them. Many younger people in cities rely less on cars. They use trains, bicycles, apps, delivery services. Mobility feels flexible, temporary, digital, but for many older Britons, driving still represents continuity with the world they understood for decades. Without it, life can shrink very quickly. What's interesting is how quietly fierce it's underneath this entire debate. Not only fear from older drivers, but from everyone else too. Because aging remains one of the few universal experiences modern society still struggles to discuss honestly, we celebrate youth obsessively, productivity obsessively, reinvention obsessively, but dependence, slowing down, reduced confidence, those realities remain deeply uncomfortable. And so these DVLA reminders become symbols of something much bigger than forms or regulations. They force people to confront vulnerability in a culture that prefers denial. You can already sense the political implications beginning to emerge. Older voters remain one of the most influential groups in British politics. Governments know this, opposition parties know this, and policies affecting pensioners carry emotional consequences far beyond their technical details. Even small administrative changes can create enormous symbolic reactions if people feel targeted or dismissed. The conversation seems to be shifting toward a wider question now. What does respectful aging actually look like in modern Britain? Because respect is not simply allowing people complete freedom regardless of circumstance, but nor is it treating older citizens as fragile obstacles requiring endless monitoring. Somewhere between those extremes sits a more humane conversation, and I'm not entirely convinced politics has found it yet. There's also a class dimension here that rarely gets acknowledged openly. Wealthier retirees living in connected areas may adapt more easily if driving becomes difficult. They can afford taxis, deliveries, private support, but working-class pensioners in isolated communities often depend on driving absolutely. For them, losing a license can mean practical disappearance from public life. And honestly, that's where this story begins to feel less like transport policy and more like a reflection of social priorities. Because Britain has slowly built a society where independence is constantly praised while the infrastructure supporting independence quietly disappears. Bus routes vanish, local shops close, community centers struggle, healthcare centralizes, families scatter geographically, then eventually an older person receives a letter suggesting they may need additional checks before driving, and suddenly their entire fragile system of autonomy feels uncertain. The emotional reaction is not only about the letter itself, it's about everything surrounding it. I think that's why these stories resonate so deeply online. People are not merely debating road safety statistics, they are projecting fears about their own futures, watching parents age, imagining themselves decades from now, wondering how society will treat them once speed, efficiency, and confidence become harder to maintain. And there's another uncomfortable layer underneath all this too. Many older people increasingly feel that competence standards are applied unevenly across society. They look around and see political dysfunction, corporate failures, collapsing public services, reckless behavior everywhere, yet somehow ordinary individuals still receive the most scrutiny, still receive the reminder letters, still carry the burden of proving themselves. Fairly or unfairly, that perception matters emotionally, and maybe the deeper question here is not whether assessments are necessary. Perhaps they are. Maybe certain medical checks genuinely save lives. Maybe regular reviews are responsible governance in an aging society. But policy is never only about outcomes, it's also about dignity, tone, trust, the feeling people carry away afterward. Because once people feel managed rather than respected, resentment grows very quickly. In the end, I suspect this debate will continue expanding far beyond driving itself. It touches something profoundly modern and profoundly human at the same time. How do advanced societies deal with aging populations while still preserving individuality? How do you balance collective safety with personal autonomy? How do you acknowledge vulnerability without quietly stripping people of status? Those questions are not going away, and perhaps that explains why a simple reminder letter can suddenly feel so emotionally charged. It arrives not merely as paperwork, but as a subtle confrontation with time itself, a reminder that aging is no longer theoretical, that systems are watching more closely now, that independence once taken for granted may eventually require justification. And honestly, maybe that's the unsettling part people are reacting to most. Not the forms, not the regulations, but the quiet realization that one ordinary envelope can force an entire country to think about what happens when freedom slowly becomes conditional. And I think there's one final thing worth sitting with here. The people opening these letters are not abstract demographics. They are individuals carrying decades of memory, responsibility, sacrifice, and experience. Many of them helped build the systems now assessing them. Many spent their lives following rules, paying taxes, contributing quietly, expecting that aging would bring not privilege exactly, but perhaps a certain degree of understanding. Instead, there's this subtle atmosphere of evaluation surrounding later life now: fitness assessments, digital barriers, fraud warnings, renewals, verifications, endless reminders that competence must continually be demonstrated. And while some of that is unavoidable in a complicated modern society, you can understand why exhaustion creeps in. Because eventually people begin asking a difficult emotional question: at what point does protection start feeling like suspicion? Maybe future governments will handle these conversations more carefully. Maybe technology will make driving safer for everyone regardless of age. Or maybe this tension simply becomes part of aging in the 21st century. More supervision, more monitoring, more negotiation between freedom and safety. But right now, for many older drivers across Britain, it feels personal, quietly, deeply personal, and perhaps the challenge for society is deciding whether older citizens should feel trusted while aging or merely tolerated while declining. Those are different experiences, and the answer shapes more than transport policy. It may shape how millions experience age,